Hey there, and welcome to your video. This is quiz 4 of Unit 5, so it's going to cover topic 5.7, which is meat production methods, topic 5.8, which is impacts of overfishing, and topic 5.16, which is aquaculture. So the very first thing we're going to talk about is meat production methods. So basically we're talking about things like cows and pigs and chickens. Those are our big three that we sheep and goat as well, our big five that we raise. Notice that the word for the aggregate word for cows that are used for meat is cattle. So anyway, the first thing is, what is forage? This is not necessarily a definition that you can expect to see in the national exam. You simply need to know what it is in context. It's vegetation for grazing. So remember, there are three ways that you can raise animals that are intended for meat. You can do rangelands, which are wide open spaces. If you are familiar with the whole the whole cowboy thing, you know, you drive cattle and you go from place to place to place so they can eat, and then you drive them away before they eat too much and go somewhere else, and then you give them some water. That is what the cowboys used to do. And actually here in the state of Florida, raising cattle was a pretty big thing back in the 1800s and early 1900s. So yeah, pasture is basically the same idea as a rangeland, which is just a place where they can eat grass, but there's fences. And it's it's auto ranch, excuse me. And so they usually have to go back and kind of rotate the cattle to make sure that they, or whatever it is that they are grazing, to make sure that they don't eat everything down to nubbins where it can't bounce back. We're going to get to exactly how that works here in a minute. Do you need to know the difference between grazing and browsing? Not so much. You know, one is eating grass and the other one's eating shrubs. Things like cattle and sheep typically are eating grass. Pigs and chickens, you don't typically see, you know, you don't have herds of pigs that you drive across the plains. Those are typically raised in a certain area near a barn usually. Chickens you can let go free range. Of course, the problem is that they are small and tasty, and so they're not as protected from predators that way. But they can be, they'll come back at night, basically. They like to sleep in the same place. But this is largely talking about the larger animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. And the ones that usually you've seen, not you, but that are seen being taken from place to place traditionally. You know, again, back in the day, it was all about rangelands. You took your animals around basically a course, and you only spent a certain amount of time in different places. I mean, think about why that might be a sustainable way of doing things. Not only do they not eat everything down to nothing, so then nothing grows back. They also don't leave too much of their animal manure behind, and so you don't have this buildup of disease there either. So you kind of allow natural processes to take care of the impact that these herds of domesticated animals have, you know, on the environment. Remember again, where you find grasslands, temperate and tropical climates. In temperate climates, remember, they're called prairies, and in tropical climates, they're called savanna. Okay, difference between rangelands and pastures, I think I covered that. Describe how rangeland grass grows. Okay, so this is kind of key. Blades of rangeland grass grow from the base, not at the tip. So that means that you can, if this is grass, let me make this a little smaller, sorry about that. If this is grass, and an animal comes nom 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 nom. So there's little nubbins of the grass left, and then there's this whole root structure underneath the ground that is still very much alive. You don't have to know this for the quiz, but there's this, we'll talk about it in class, these things called rhizomes that are underneath here that are the living reproducing part of, not reproducing, but the living producing part of the plant. And then you have grass again. Not that I suggest you do that. Do this in your lawn if you have a lawn, but when you pull up the grass, you'll notice, although it looks like a bunch of different blades, underneath you have this long strip that connects all the blades together. That's the underground part I was talking about, the rhizomes. So again, you can nom 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 nom. But if you still have little nubbins of the grass left, it will grow back without any problems, provided that you allow it to. Now, not only is this good for rangeland animals, but just as a callback, if you guys remember, fire is what controls these ecosystems. So think about it from a fire perspective. If you burn all of this, you still have living parts right here at the surface of the soil or under the soil, and then it will grow back in its newly enriched soil from its burnt predecessors, basically. Okay, so again, as long as the lower portion remains in the ground, it's a renewable resource. The problem that comes when you have something called overgrazing, and this is when you have too many animals graze in an area for too long, and they damage or kill the grass. So basically, they eat all of it, and the grass ends up dying. And this is an elegant way of putting it. It exceeds the carrying capacity of the area. It is everything you expect. Remember what plants do for soil, especially plants in grasslands. They hold that soil in place. They help to enrich it. So a couple things can happen. No roots in the ground. That's when you have water and wind erosion blowing that topsoil away, basically leading to desertification. You're creating a desert because you just have subsoil left there. The animals can trample that soil and then compact it to the point that even if you did plant seeds there or it did rain, nothing would absorb into the ground. Now, what if that prairie is on top of a recharge area for an aquifer? Now you, with that compacted soil, have created an impermeable surface. Water that has all of that soil in it can then wash into waterways where they are darker, meaning that they get warmer, meaning they hold less oxygen. Also, that dirt straight up gets into the gills of animals, aquatic animals that live in there. That turbidity, that is what we call the suspended particles in the water, can make it difficult for some animals to hunt. And then this is another issue here. You have the invasion of rangeland by invasive species, which the cattle will not eat, and then also doesn't support the other organisms that are living there in that ecosystem. Now the problem comes, you're like, well, why does anybody do this with rangeland? And the answer is, it is a good old tragedy of the commons. I want mine now because God knows what's going to be left for me later. So ranchers, which is what we call people who raise cattle for their living, get real hostile when they're told that they can't use a rangeland, which to them looks perfectly fine to use, not understanding that it needs to be left alone so that it can essentially recharge. How can rangeland be managed sustainably? It's just like with farms. If you do rotational grazing, where small groups of cattle are confined in one area to one area to one area to one area, you basically have to control what's going on and don't act like you're going to go away and it's going to come back and just immediately renew itself. You have to do this in a sustainable fashion. Now, as we're going to see with the increased demand for meat, it's real hard to tell people, whoa, you got to slow down. Okay, so that is how you manage the actual land itself. There are parts of this land that are around ponds and other natural water sources, again, especially along streams or rivers lined by strips of vegetation known as riparian zones. This is something that you need to know. So if you have a river, the thin, green, lush areas on either side are called riparian zones. Now, not only is overgrazing an issue here as well, but imagine what those really large animals do to that. They trample it, they pretty much tear it up, dirt washes directly into the stream, and because that riparian zone is a unique ecosystem with the unique conditions that you see along either side of a stream, all the organisms that used to live there lose their habitat. Anytime you have disturbed soil that's open like that, again, remember you have the possibility of invasive plant species coming in there and basically permanently changing the ecosystem. So how can you prevent this? Basically, don't let the animals go down to the riparian zone to drink and eat. This is an example of a riparian zone over here. This river is also this river. So you can see when the land is allowed to repair itself, no problem. It does it without any issue whatsoever. So try and not let your animals just spend days at a time just trampling this one particular area. Let them only stay for a couple days and then move on. That's a big thing. And then ranchers can also move cattle around by providing supplemental feed and then strategically locating watering ponds or tanks and salt blocks. So just providing alternative sources of water other than, the rivers. But side note, ultimately, how do you reduce cattle's impact on the land? You have fewer cattle, which would mean for us to have less meat in our daily diets, and that's a discussion that we will be having at some point sooner rather than later. Let's see, describe the change in meat consumption since 1950. So let's see, I need to flip to 346, so give me just a second. Oh, went too far. 4, 3, 4, 5, 346. Okay. Shocking no one, meat and animal products such as eggs and milk are sources of high-quality protein, but between 1950 and 2014, global meat production grew more than sixfold. This is not just the United States. This is everywhere. So you can see that there are some graphs down here. You can see that that is the case. Meat used to be expensive, and so people used it as a special side dish on the plate. The majority of the plate would be taken up with a grain, like rice or bread or noodles, and also with some sort of vegetable. That would be the majority of the plate. Now a lot of, especially American plates, are different. They've flip-flopped, so a lot of meat and then not as many vegetables and grains. Definitely know the what are the 3 most consumed types of meat? That's going to be pork, which comes from pigs, poultry, which comes from chickens and turkeys, and beef. We'll talk about this in class, but shocking no one, out of those 3 types of animals, chickens have the smallest footprint, not only because they're smaller, but because they just don't cause the kind of destruction that beef does. Plus, beef, you have to feed cattle a lot in order to get that beef. Also, in general, just think about the consequences of this from a math perspective. If only 10% of energy is pushed up from trophic level to trophic level, think about all the people you could feed with the grain that you're instead feeding to animals to then eat the animals. Now, again, you're talking about protein here, and protein is necessary for humans to live, but there are other sources of protein, like soybeans, for example. Let's see what else I need to tell you about this. How is meat produced worldwide? Half comes from livestock grazing on grass, and then the other half is very industrialized. This is where you have things called feedlots and Kapos. If they're in feedlots, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a small area where you basically give animals a high-calorie grain like corn, which is not something they normally eat in, I don't want to say the natural environment, since these animals have gone through a lot of artificial selection to get to be the way that they are. But not on a rangeland, you're not going to come across corn. Corn is high in starches, high in carbohydrates, and it definitely causes cattle to put on weight real quick, which makes them more marketable, because the more animals that you can raise, more quickly, the more profit you can get when they're slaughtered. And then you also have what are called Kapos, which are concentrated animal feeding operations. It's exactly what it sounds like. They are just packed on top of each other, and you fatten them up as quickly as possible. It's really hard to tell, but these are all cows that are just shoved up right next to each other. The other brown you're most likely seeing is the feces that they are just standing in. It's usually right up to about their knees. This is a feedlot where they're just, again, being force-fed. Not force-fed, but they're getting grain constantly. Here, this is a CAFO. The difference between the two is pretty small, but you can see here that the chickens are next to each other. The reason they're not really moving is that these chickens are bred to have big breast meat, and so they're in some cases too heavy to walk, let alone fly. Chickens fly, that's what they have wings for, but here they have been selectively bred to fatten up quickly, and then walking and certainly flying is not necessary, nor is it wanted. Take a look at what they're fed. Grain, soybeans, fish meal, and fish oil, definitely things they're not used to eating in a more natural surrounding. And then a lot of times they were given growth hormones. And then this is important right here, antibiotics. As we're going to talk about later when we talk about disease, low-level antibiotic use has been linked to the development of strains of bacteria that used to not be a problem that now resist most, if not all, antibiotics. We're starting to see wounds getting infected and not healing. You have to think, if we don't have antibiotics, surgery is going to be pretty dicey. It also means that something as simple as a strep throat could end up killing you. But again, we will discuss this a little bit later down the line, and there's some very simple things that you can do to kind of help antibiotics come back into effectiveness. How are CAFOs different than a rangeland? Well, obviously the animals are there to be fed, fattened up quickly, and then taken to slaughter so that their parts can be sold. So it's all about getting them in, getting them fat, getting them big, getting them slaughtered, and getting them out again. And you're definitely feeding them things that they would not normally encounter out on a rangeland. Why do they not feed them grass? Because grass doesn't last for very long when it's not actually rooted into the ground. It can mold. It's not easy to store because it's wet. It's got a lot of moisture in it, so it's not a good choice. It takes a lot of energy to raise meat, again, because we talked about the trophic level aspect of it. What are impacts of CAFOs on the environment? So let me go ahead and turn to page 353. So, and please do understand, it sounds like I'm knocking CAFOs. This is a big one. Less land use. They have a smaller physical footprint because you're raising a lot of animals in one small place. You don't have to worry about riparian zones being destroyed because they're nowhere near a riparian zone. Reduces soil erosion, and obviously it protects the biodiversity of the land they would normally be walking across. Do make sure that you read all of the disadvantages. This environmental impacts of human decisions are a pretty big thing to know. Okay. And then this is, think about outside of the box. Think about all of the water and the fossil fuels that are being used to grow the grain that's ultimately going to these animals. Animal waste, oh my goodness. So there's, it often is so contaminated with residues of antibiotics and pesticides that it is unfit for use as a fertilizer. So, a lot of it is stored in lagoons until it can be dried out and sent to a landfill, obviously stinky, and then if it leaks, pollutes nearby drinking water, and then because it goes through anaerobic, which is without oxygen decomposition, methane gas can be produced, and that is a greenhouse gas. Um, so cattle and dairy cows release methane, and it's any of them. It's not just grain-fed ones. It's also grass-fed ones as well. So the more meat we want, the more methane that we are producing. Definitely read about antibiotic use again. I think I pretty much covered that. Why is it used before they get sick? It's to try and prevent the spread of disease because these animals are on top of each other. Remember, disease is a density-dependent population control. But we do know that this is driving. I mean, think about it. If you've got an antibiotic that kills 99% of the bacteria that's in a place, the 1% that's left is not only going to reproduce, but then any bacteria it comes across, and this is something bacteria can do, it's going to pass along a plasmid, which is basically the knowledge on how to resist the antibiotic. Let's see what else. Again, grass-fed doesn't necessarily mean that you are saving yourself problems. You look at developing countries, they're cutting down forests to raise cattle because you can make a lot of money. And again, you can see here, grass-fed cows emit more methane than grain-fed cows. So, problem. Okay, so impacts of overfishing. 353. I skipped over an entire page. So please make sure that you read this as well. So you want to go through this. Go through this entire page, 353 to 354. So impacts of overfishing. Let me get back to 346. Know the difference between a fishery and aquaculture. A fishery is basically out in the wild, a school or an area of where shellfish are. Shellfish means things like oysters and shrimp and lobster and mussels, anything with, a shell. If you hear the term bivalve, that specifically is oysters and mussels and scallops. Why bivalve? Because it's two shells. They're connected by a muscle here, and it's two shells, and they actually open it shut, and they can not only eat, but they can squirt water out and swim away. All right, so fishery, get that definition. How do they find these fish? Really high-tech ways. It's so not only sonar, you're talking about drones, you're talking about GPS, spotter planes, and then how do they go out and get the stuff? It is a huge, huge operation. You're talking about nets, if they're drift nets, and I'll show you what that is in a second, that are, a mile at least long. If you've ever watched some of those, like The Most Dangerous Catch or whatever, it gives you an idea of just how big these things are. Also, if you've seen the movie Finding Nemo, you've seen a type of fishing called purse seine netting. So you're not talking about catching 5 fish. You're talking about catching thousands of fish at the same time. Define the different types of fishing. So that's 346. We're going to come back to what aquaculture is here in a second. Do be aware that we have obliterated some types of fish that are out in the wild. There's some things that we just don't fish anymore because we've depleted them. Again, the whole tragedy of the commons thing. Okay, so here are the different types of nets. This is aquaculture, so we'll come back to that in a second. That's also aquaculture. So here's what you have. You have what's called drift net fishing. You literally just let a net just drift behind you. How does it catch the fish? It's caught by their gills, and it's pretty much and they flop around until they die. So you let it sit there for a while, you catch them, you pull it in. Long line is exactly what it sounds like. You have a lot of the hooks are baited, and then you just let it go, and then after a little while you pull it back in. These are all for more muscular fish. You're talking about like tuna, stuff like that. So where they're going to be a little bit more apt to get away. If you have something like purse seine netting, it is you have a circular net, and then you just like in Finding Nemo when Dory got caught in the net, and then it comes up underneath, and then the top part gets pulled shut. If anybody has ever seen a purse, that's basically just a piece of fabric, and then it's got a drawstring, and it pulls shut, and it makes like a little pouch. Dumplings are made this way as well. That is exactly how you do it. So you maneuver this under a school of fish. These are smaller fish, and then you just pull it shut, get it on board, and then open it, and then sort everything. Okay, so trawlers, they don't really, I wish they had talked about it in here. Trawling is the most, we're going to talk about this in class. I'm not going to hold you responsible for this on the test, or excuse me, on your quiz. Trawling is the most devastating to ecosystems because basically you just drag it along the ground, and if there's a coral reef down there, too bad. If there is, whatever little ecosystem has set itself up on the ocean floor, too bad. You scrape it along the ground, catch fish that live down there on the bottom. You think about stuff like catfish and whatnot, and then you scoop it up. What do you think is a major problem with all these methods of fishing? Thinking about what I've been saying. You put it out there with big schools of fish, and then you let them sit for a while, and you pull it back in. This is not mentioned in your book, but it's something called bycatch, and I will explain this in class too. Bycatch is when you catch something you didn't mean to catch. So like dolphins in a drift net, or turtles in a trawler, birds, because the longline sea has these floats on it, floats at the surface, so albatross will come in and get hooked and die and drown in those things. And then whatever else gets caught up in this purse seine net. Now, do the fishermen lovingly sort out the things it didn't need and gently throw them back in the ocean? No, they're dead. They're killed. Up until very recently, with tuna, any dolphin that were caught in the tuna were just processed with the tuna into the tuna. It wasn't until public outcry that modifications were made in drift net fishing, at least in the United States. I don't know if that's the case everywhere. Although there are international laws that are protecting marine organisms, there are some countries that just flat out refuse to be a part of that process. So anyway, purse seine netting, trawling, drift net fishing, longline fishing. The problem there is bycatch. How has commercial fishing impacted natural fish populations? Some of them it is just completely decimated. And again, you can see right here, about 87% of the world's oceans fisheries have been harvested full capacity or are overfished. So yeah, you can see that wild fish it's declining. How do you think this has impacted other marine populations? Well, whatever eats them is also declining as well. Okay, what is aquaculture? It is the practice of raising fish in freshwater ponds, lakes, reservoirs, and rice paddies. Sometimes you just do aquaculture so it's by itself. Sometimes you do it in conjunction with other processes. So here's what I mean. And then there are two ways to do it when it's by itself. You can either take advantage of all of the systems in place in the ocean and just raise them in a cage, and then you pull it out when you're ready, like this and this. The pro side is you don't have to take up any land to do this. You also don't have to install much of anything because the ocean takes care of most things. But then the downside is because the school is sitting where it is, any waste or disease that builds up in this area will then affect all the wild populations that are around it. Also, if these are genetically modified and happen to escape, they can become an invasive species in this area. You can also raise this in conjunction with other things. As an example, if you have, it's actually part of a wastewater cleansing process. You can raise shrimp in there. And the shrimp will help to cleanse the water. So you can raise shrimp and then aquatic plants like rice all together. So the rice will grow on the shrimp's waste, and then also the water that it's in, and then the shrimp benefits from the shelter that the rice roots provides for them. Benefits and drawbacks, I think I kind of went over that a little bit, 346, 355. Let's see if there's a nice little list for you to look at. Do like how this book does trade-offs for you. Pros and cons are always important. because you could be asked to argue either side. So very efficient. You don't have to go out looking for anything. High yield again. You're kind of concentrating what you're doing. All of the stuff. And remember again, anytime you start something new, jobs are big. A lot of times mangrove forest and estuaries are destroyed to create these aquacultures. And I already talked about the other stuff here as well. So do make sure that you also read this in here. Obviously, you don't need to know specific percentages, but just be familiar with what's going on. You're also, this is a hidden one. A major environmental problem associated with aquaculture is that a third of the wild fish caught from the oceans are used to make the fish meal. So it can be take pressure off of natural populations, but not necessarily. You gotta be really careful when you look at this stuff. So make sure that you read all of this, sources of pollution, again, all of those, and then these guys right here. So that's pretty much the end of your reading for this particular section.